Hello and welcome to Unit 4.4 Anaerobic Respiration in our class about cells. My name is Lauren Davis. I'm one of the instructors of this class. Remember last in 4.3 we talked about anaerobic and aerobic respiration. Remember that anaerobic respiration is the respiration that happens without oxygen, and aerobic respiration talks about the last two parts of cellular respiration, or the two stages, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, that actually use oxygen. And so we're going to be focusing on that first, the glycolysis part of cellular respiration, when we talk about anaerobic respiration. So anaerobic respiration, another name for that could be fermentation. Now, fermentation, you might notice, is a term that's associated with producing alcohol. And alcohol is something we use, in beer and wine, and we ferment the grains and the sugars with yeast, and it ferments for a while, and then it produces this alcohol. Well, a type of fermentation that also happens within our bodies, and it has to do with those pyruvates. And those pyruvates are, remember, the two parts of the glucose molecule. So the first glycolysis breaks down the glucose molecule into two pyruvates. Well, in the absence of oxygen, pyruvates will not go on to the Krebs cycle and then into the electron transport chain. So pyruvates can bind with an extra hydrogen molecule from the NADH and form what's called lactic acid. Now, we have lactic acid that builds up to us. If you've ever worked really hard or worked out really fast, and then you get really tired and your muscles start to hurt, okay, that is a form of anaerobic respiration, and that is where you are driving your body into what's called oxygen debt. Okay, and when you have oxygen debt, you don't have enough oxygen in order to keep moving, but you can keep going through cellular respiration, because glycolysis is the first stage of that, of cellular respiration, can continue to occur without the oxygen. Okay, and so without the oxygen present, the NADH that's produced in glycolysis can't go on to the Krebs cycle and then to the electron transport chain, and neither can the pyruvates. So what happens is the hydrogen part of NADH, that H part, will bind with the pyruvate, and it will form lactic acid. And lactic acid, if we are working really hard, like we talked about before, if we were working really hard or sprinting, or if you sprint a long distance like a 400 and your muscles start to hurt and cramp up, it's because the lactic acid that is forming in our muscles because of this anaerobic process. Okay. So lactic acid fermentation, remember, the pyruvate is converted to lactic acid. The H, again, from the glycolysis, will continue to produce ATP. Remember that each time you go through that first stage, you're forming two ATP molecules. And so as this cycle continues to happen, or this fermentation cycle continues to happen, every time it goes through the NADH, the H is released and forms with the pyruvate and forms a lactic acid. Two ATPs are formed each time that happens, and so your cells can continue to get energy and continue to keep going even in the absence of oxygen. Okay, so again, the NADH, the H part, will bind with the pyruvates, and that is what is called a lactate, or lactic acid. So alcohol fermentation is similar to that, and so the pyruvates are converted to alcohol and CO2. Okay, and the alcohol usually is produced with a yeast. Okay, and the yeast is actually what's forming the alcohol or ethanol from this same process. So where does this fermentation happen? Well, it can happen in our bodies through that first glycolysis stage, in breaking down in glucose, and in cellular respiration. It can happen in some bacteria, but it also could happen in yeast. And yeast is and instead of getting lactate, yeast will give off the alcohol in the form of ethanol. So aerobic respiration evolved after oxygen was added to the Earth's atmosphere. The advantage of aerobic respiration is it produces more energy. Remember, the last two stages of cellular respiration can form maybe 36 ATP. Well, glycolysis can only form 2. And so it's much more efficient if it goes on to the other stages of cellular respiration, the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. So the advantage of anaerobic respiration, however, is that it will allow ATP to keep being produced, okay, even in the absence of oxygen, and it's there for us to use for quick and intense activity, but it runs out really fast. Okay, so the ATP produced from glycolysis and through this anaerobic respiration is good to have, and it's good for flight and fright reflex when we have to get away from a situation quickly. Okay, but it also will run out fast, and then we'll have to depend on the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain, the rest of the cellular respiration cycles.